Awesome. So thanks again for coming. This is the environmental impact of food waste with Glean, Kentucky, Western Kentucky University's Food Recovery Network chapter, and the Western Kentucky University Office of Sustainability. So today I'll be talking about some of the ways that food waste contributes to climate change and environmental degradation. And it's a very complicated issue and we have pretty limited time, so I won't cover all of the ways that food waste harms our environment, just a couple of the big ones. Oops, there we go. Okay. So it's very important to understand how big of an issue food waste really is. Up to 40% of all of the food that's produced for human consumption worldwide is wasted. And food waste and food loss occurs at all different levels in the food supply chain. So to help illustrate how pervasive food waste and loss is, I'll give some examples of food waste at different stages. So in the production stage, it might occur when farmers grow extra food that ultimately is wasted to account for possible crop loss due to bad weather, disease. So basically, when farmers hedge their bets by overproducing. At the processing stage, it might occur when edible portions of food, such as fruits and vegetable peels, are removed. And baby carrots are a great example of this. At the distribution stage, food waste can occur because of delays in the shipment of food or failures in the systems that keep food at the proper temperature. At the retail level, food is wasted because store policies mandate that displays must always be kept full, or because stores discard food that is cosmetically imperfect or ugly food. And at the consumer level, food waste occurs because people throw out food that has passed its expiration date, even if it's still safe to eat, or because they don't plan out their meals in advance and they purchase more food than they can eat in time. And the percentage of food that's wasted at each stage in the food supply chain varies from country to country. But overall, the total percentage of food waste remains somewhere between 30 and 40% of food, and that's pretty standard across countries. And for fruits and vegetables, which is what my organization, Glean, Kentucky, focuses on, that amount of food that goes to waste tends to be much higher. And storage issues for perishable fruits and vegetables are a big factor that leads to that. At the same time that food waste happens, hunger is a very serious issue. And in Kentucky, for example, Feeding America has found that 1 in 7 people experience food insecurity. But fortunately, food waste and hunger can be solved at the same time by just reallocating the surplus food that otherwise would go to waste to people who need it. And apart from being a major problem because of how many people struggle to get enough to eat, food waste has many negative effects on the environment. And a good way to think about this is that all the inputs that go to produce food are also wasted when that food isn't eaten. Food waste releases a considerable amount of greenhouse gases, which contribute to climate change by trapping radiation that warms up our Earth and our atmosphere. A study from 2011 by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations found that 8% of all anthropogenic or human-caused greenhouse gas emissions are caused by food waste and food loss. So it has a pretty sizable impact on climate change. And that study from 2011 also found that when you compare the greenhouse gas emissions of global food waste as a whole to the greenhouse gas emissions of individual countries, food waste ranks 3rd behind China and the US in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions. So food waste is a pretty serious issue, as you can see. And there are many different ways that food waste is linked with greenhouse gas emissions, but one significant linkage that helps illustrate the connection is the release of greenhouse gases from food waste in landfills. So the EPA has found that food waste comprises the largest category of waste in municipal landfills. So it's a very big percentage of what is in landfills. And when food ends up in landfills, it decomposes and produces what's referred to as landfill gas, which is roughly half carbon dioxide and half methane. And we're probably all aware that carbon dioxide is a very potent greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change, but methane is actually much more effective at trapping radiation in our atmosphere. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, landfills are the 3rd biggest source of methane emissions in the United States, at about 17% of our emissions. So it's important to note that the biggest source of methane emissions is also tied to food production, and that is livestock production and manure management, and that accounts for 38% of the US's methane emissions. So all of the animals that we raise for meat that's never eaten, which is about 20% of meat that's produced, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and all of the food that decomposes in landfills make a really big impact on climate change. A cultural norm of high levels of food waste leads food to be overproduced, which means that an excessive amount of land is used for food production rather than maintained in its natural and biodiverse state. The National Resources Defense Council, which is a big nonprofit that does a lot of environmental science work, found that between 18 and 28% of cropland in the US is used to grow food that ultimately is wasted. And when we cultivate that additional land that we use to produce wasted food, we're removing native forests, grasslands, and other important ecosystems that provide habitat for wildlife, stabilize soil, and sequester carbon. Using land for pasture or crop production leads to greater erosion. And also, the more land that we use to produce food, the more fertilizers and pesticides are applied to land. When fertilizers are over-applied and cannot be fully taken up by plants, they wash off into waterways, and this agricultural runoff causes problems by creating an environment where algae thrive. With an overabundance of nutrients, algae populations can grow tremendously in what's known as an algae bloom, to the point where they block light and cause aquatic plants to die. When the algae and aquatic plants die, they decompose in a process that depletes oxygen in the water and causes die-offs of aquatic animals. So this imbalance of nutrients, which is tied to agriculture, and imbalance of oxygen leads to dead zones in our oceans and waterways, which is very problematic. Food waste is also tied to negative impacts on our water quality and water availability. Agriculture accounts for the majority of the United States freshwater consumption, and 24% of the water used for agriculture goes to produce wasted food, according to reporting from National Public Radio. It takes a lot of water to grow, process, and transport food, and when we waste that food, a lot of water goes to waste as well. And so a good way to look at this is to think about fruits and vegetables. A big percentage of their weight is made up of water. Apples contain 80% water, for instance, sorry. And when food goes to waste, that water can be either lost when it's trapped in sealed landfills, and landfills are frequently sealed off to prevent contaminants from leaching out into the environment. So that's why the water gets lost. Or it can just be displaced, where water evaporates into the air where the food is disposed of, which can be between hundreds and thousands of miles away from the food's actual source. So this puts a big strain on water-stressed areas that produce and export a lot of food, and in particular, water-intensive fruits and vegetables. And the state of California is a good example of where this is an issue. And so this issue leads to desertification and other related climate issues. As I mentioned in the last slide, food is often consumed far away from where it's grown. A lot of the produce that you find in supermarkets comes from coastal states like California and Florida, or even other continents. In our global food system, food travels hundreds or even thousands of miles. And so this ties in with the concept of food miles, which you may be familiar with. And when that food is wasted, the oil and coal that's burned to transport, refrigerate, and process it also goes to waste. Additionally, much of the food that we eat is packaged in plastic that's recycled maybe 1 or 2 times before going to a landfill. And the Environmental Protection Agency has calculated that only about 8 to 9% of plastic is even recycled, so the majority of plastic ends up just being used once and disposed of. And plastic is a major pollutant, as we know, that harms wildlife and takes many years to fully decompose. So there are lots more problems because of that. So food waste is a very heavy topic and is very problematic, but thankfully there are several ways that we can reduce food waste and thus reduce our environmental impact. And on this slide, you can see the EPA's food recovery hierarchy. So it's this sort of inverted triangle. And this is a tool that the Environmental Protection Agency created to rank the most to least preferable ways to deal with surplus food. So at the top, we have source reduction, and that's the best way to deal with surplus food. And at the bottom, we have the landfill, and that's the worst. Sending surplus food to landfills is the least preferable choice because it locks up nutrients and water in landfills, and it doesn't provide any societal or environmental benefits in exchange for all of the resources that went into producing that food. The best way to handle food waste is just to reduce the amount of surplus food that you generate by only buying what you know you'll eat, and just producing less food. But feeding hungry people through gleaning and food recovery is the next most environmentally and socially preferable solution. And so we're going to talk for the next couple of minutes about different ways that people can become involved with gleaning and food recovery in our community. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I'm the South Central Kentucky Field Coordinator for Glean Kentucky. So for those who aren't familiar with what the word glean means, it refers to the act of gathering leftover crops from a field after a harvest. And this was historically done by the poor in many parts of Europe. And some countries, such as France and England, the right of poor people to glean was even protected by the government, although this was restricted in the 1700s in those countries. But so it's a historically important way to reduce food waste and also to feed people in need. And the nonprofit organization that I work for, Glean Kentucky, continues this legacy by gleaning surplus food from different sources to feed people who are struggling with food insecurity today. Our mission is to gather and redistribute excess fresh fruits and vegetables to nourish Kentucky's hungry. We focus on fruits and vegetables because of their high nutritional value, and also because a lot of fruits and vegetables go to waste, more so than other categories of food. And we partner with many different sources of excess produce, including farms, orchards, home gardens, and grocery stores. Our volunteers pick up produce that has already been harvested or harvest produce from the field. We'll actually go out and participate in field harvest, which is really fun. And we transport that surplus produce to soup kitchens, food pantries, and other feeding programs. We've been operating since 2010 when we were founded in the Lexington area, and last fall we expanded to South Central Kentucky, where we have a program that is centered in Bowling Green. We're looking for volunteers and donors of produce in Warren and the surrounding counties, so if you know anyone and you're interested, please reach out. And you can contact me at elaine@gleanky.org or go on our website, and our Instagram handles on this slide as well. And now I'm going to hand it off to Allison Cook, who's the president of the Food Recovery Network at Western Kentucky University.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Like she said, my name is Allison Cook, and I am the current president of WKU's Food Recovery. I succeeded Elaine, who so wonderfully got us our start and is continuing her work in fighting food waste with Glean Kentucky. Food Recovery Network is a national nonprofit organization that utilizes university and college students across the U.S. to fight food waste and recover perishable food items and donating them to those in need. FRN at WKU got its start in 2019 with Elaine and has grown into a team of dedicated volunteers who do multiple recoveries a day for an array of partner agencies within the Bowling Green community. Last semester, we had a monumental 5,000 pounds of food recovered and donated, and we're still going. The Food Recovery Network allows us to advocate for those experiencing food insecurity and poverty in the hopes to create a more equitable and sustainable future. We would love to grow our network and our team, so I invite you to scan the QR code in the corner and join us in fighting food waste. Thank you all.
So Dr. Leslie North of the Western Kentucky University Office of Sustainability is up next.
Hi, thank you, Elaine, for putting this together. So we were asked to share a little bit about what we do in our office to help fight some of the food-related issues that Elaine did a wonderful job covering. So within our office, we actually are the house for the Food Recovery Network. So we work with them to make sure that, you know, they have whatever supplies and things that they need in the space that they need for their operations. And then sometimes, depending on their recoveries, we also would distribute some of those items in addition to other items that we receive through our food pantry. So within our office, we have a food pantry that is completely open to anyone. Historically, it was open to those only affiliated with WKU, but that was expanded in March of last year in response to the just burgeoning food insecurity issues that we were facing as a community. So anyone is welcome to come. We don't ask questions. We wanted you to feel as welcome, as comfortable as possible for anyone who is in need. The other thing that we're always looking for, not only, you know, people who to help spread the word that this is a resource available in the community to help, you know, provide and distribute some of these materials that are being recovered, but also collecting donations, whether that be food, direct food donations, or monetary contributions to the office, which we then can go out and purchase goods to make sure that we have a big diversity of items, and then anyone feels that they can get what they would need to have a nutritional diet. On the bottom of the screen are our Facebook and Instagram. We also have a Twitter account. They're kind of being cut off from on my side of the screen, but I encourage you to follow us on, you know, through social media outlets, and we're constantly posting information about the hours, volunteer opportunities, donation opportunities, etc. So, you know, over in the picture we put there that WKU is all about, you know, a community and a family and a home. So that's kind of the mantra here that I think all of us on this speakers, we want everybody to be part of this, you know, being a giant family and community, and we're working together to solve some of these critical issues.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And now we have a couple minutes. If anyone has any questions or discussion, we have time for that. And if not, we'll go ahead and wrap it up pretty soon.
I just wanted to say I did not know the origins of Glean. That was so interesting. I definitely knew the meaning of the word, but I didn't know the history behind it. That was actually really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the word I think has biblical origins. I don't know the exact details, but yeah, it's a very long-lasting tradition.
Well, I would just wrap up by saying, you know, thank you to those of you who have already contributed. I'm sure several of you who might watch this recording later have contributed, either helping in the pantry, making a donation, again, whether it be direct food supply, working with the volunteers of the Food Recovery Network, you know, farmers who are helping Elaine in the Glean, Kentucky, you know, gather materials. So it truly does take a small army of people to make these things happen and to make, you know, help address some of these issues. I just want to say truly on behalf of the Office of Sustainability and WKU, thank you so much across the board. Not a single can or single minute of time is ever gone unappreciated. And I just want everyone to definitely know that.
Well, thank you. That's so well put. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, but thank you all for coming. And thanks for engaging and learning more about food waste.
Thank you, Elaine. It was really great.
Thank you.